Thank you. So I don't know, maybe because in Indonesia we have a different time for Maghrib prayer. So and in Indonesia will come soon, Maghrib. So we'd like to start the first presentation and session by Ulya Fikriyati. So before Ulya start to present, I just want to give a short introduction about Ulya. So Ulya Fikriyati is a lecturer or the Center of Tafsir and Quranic Studies at Institut Ilmu Keislaman Annuqayah, Guluk-Guluk Sumeneb, Madura, East Java in Indonesia. So she is an expert in Quranic studies with the specialization on tafsir, and her most recent work is Vernacular Tafsir in Madura, Negotiating Human Equality and Social Hierarchical Tradition, published by Australian Journal of Islamic Studies. And Ulya Fikriyati also became a second winner of writing an article, a competition by the International Committee of the Red Cross, or ICRC, in collaboration with Al-Jamiah Journal, UIN Sunan Kalijaga, and Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, Kuala Lumpur. She is working on saving life and limiting means and method of warfare. And she is working on 5 Indonesian tafsir and mufassir. They are Tarjuma al-Mustafid by Sheikh Abdul Rauf al-Sinkili, Munir Marah Labib by Sheikh Nawawi al-Bantani, Tafsir al-Azhar by Buya Hamka, Tafsir al-Misbah Quraish Shihab, and Tafsir Firdaus an-Naim by Kiai Muhammad Taifur. And today, Ulya will present about tafsir in Java, and her title is Integrating Normative Piety and Mysticism in 19th-Century Islam, daʿwa, analyzing the Javanese work Fayd al-Rah fi Tarjuma Tafsir Kalam Mālik al-Adyan. Or in Indonesia, we know the name of Kiai Soleh Darat. So Ulya will present about the tafsir from Kiai Soleh Darat. So we know Kiai Soleh Darat come from Semarang, and several public figures have studied and received like a sanad ilmu from Kiai Soleh Darat, and some of them are become the famous public figure like Kiai Haji Ahmad Dahlan, Kiai Haji Hashim Ash'ari. And this book of Fayd al-Rahman is interpretation of the Qur'an using Arapegon or Arab letter, but the language is bahasa language Java or bahasa Jawa. So this script use it cite that the script is compiled book by Kiai Soleh Darat, requires by R.A. Kartini. So R.A. Kartini want to understand Quran, but she couldn't read or speak Arabic language. So R.A. Kartini is a prominent figure of women movement in Indonesia in 19th century or before Indonesian independence. So Ulya Fikriyati, we have 14 minutes for our first session. So please take your 20 minutes or 25 minutes, and then we still have the rest time to discuss. Please, Ulya, time for you.
Okay, thank you, Ulya, and thank you, Professor John Ping, and also GloQur team. Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm honored to talk in this special event organized by the Global Quran. And before that, I want to share my screen. Okay. Today I would like to talk about integrating normative piety and mysticism in 19th century Islamic daʿwa, analyzing Javanese work Fayd al-Rahman fi Tarjuman Tafsir Kalam Mālik. Why do I choose the object? Java and Islam are often positioned against each other, and Java was associated with a tradition that upheld mysticism, while Islam was associated with the normative religion that only recognized the rigid rule in its teaching. And this opinion often led the conclusion that the Islam and Java cannot be together. This we can found Anderson state that the phenomenon proves that the mystical Java won its confrontation with the Islamic teaching, and also what Clifford said that in Java there are three rigid dichotomy of priai, santri, and abangan, which is santri is the Muslim with high obedience to normative piety by applying Islamic doctrine to life, while the abangan is a Muslim who gives their incredible attention to the mystical ritual. They are so different. I cannot entirely agree with Anderson or even Gerd that Java and Islam are so mysticism and normative piety oppose each other. According to what I found, the Quran translation and commentary that we are going to discuss today show the pretty harmonious integration of both mysticism and normative piety. It shows that mysticism and normative piety are complementary rather than contradictory. Okay, my recent question, the focus of my presentation is going to be how did Kiai Soleh Dara promote integration between normative piety and mysticism in his dakwah through the Japanese Quran translation and tafsir, and why did he integrate both normative piety and mysticism in his work, and what role did Fayd al-Rahman play in the Javanese Muslim community? And this is the cover of the translation. As we can see here, the title of this translation is Fayd al-Rahman fi Tarjuma Tafsir Kalam Mālik al-Dayya. This tafsir was written by Syekh Muhammad Saleh bin Umar As-Samarani, and what we have to pay attention to this translation name is the word Tarjuman Tafsir. The word indirectly tells us that this translation doesn't translate the Quran, but translate the meaning of the Quran, such as explained by Kiai Darat in his preface of this book that moko arah mangkono dadi nejo ingsun gawe tarjumahe maknane Quran dene critaken para ulama. The meaning is, therefore I propose to translate the meaning of the Quran based on the previous tafsir written by several ulama. And this is one of the well-known eldest Javanese translation of the Quran. Published at Singapore in 1311 or 1888. This is written here in the cover that it was published on 1896. But when we refer to the annotation at the end of the translation, we found it was published on 29 Jumad al-Akhirah 1311 that I convert to the Masehi. It was correspond to 7 January 1894. And this is the translation. We could see here that the translation is in Javanese, but this is not all of word in this translation is in Javanese, but it was dominated by the Javanese. There are several words in Arabic or even in Indonesian, such as we could see here at the beginning, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Amarona alaina at-ta'jil, this word, this sentence, until here, amma ba'du, it was in Arabic. But afterward, it was in Javanese. Moko teman-teman nyuwun marang saykhina mu'allifai iki tafsir setengahe ikhwan kita fitin kang supaya iki tafsir kasepara luwih dhisik senadyan mung sak surat This is some intonation when the Javanese read the Javanese manuscript, or even it is the translation of the Quran. And this is the example of the translation here. The form of this translation does not follow the common form of the modern Quran translation in a line of side by side between the Arabic text of the Quran and the translation, neither written by, with the famous form that time that each translation was written in interliner with the Arabic word. On the contrary, this translation was written as the common tafsir, a line spirited each Quranic verses here, and the translation was written in the following line. The Dutch colonial prohibits every work to translate the Quran into Arabic language. Of course, it doesn't make sense to how to translate the Arabic language to Arabic, especially for the Javanese, for the Indonesian, that they are non-Arabic speaking people. So Kiai Soledad did a simple trick to translate the Quran. He translated the Javanese by Javanese language, but used the Arabic letter of Arabic character, alif, ba, ta, and so on, that so-called pagan character. Actually, the Javanese language has its own character known by the name Hona Choroko, but Kiai Soledad chose to employ the Arabic letter to write his Javanese translation. Okay, this Javanese translation we are going to discuss today. This is the Hudal lil Muttaqin here. This part is the Quran verse, and afterward was the translation. I read the translation. Utawi mengkono-mengkono kitab iku dadi sebab kang anuduhaken marang wong kang bakal dadi muttaqin fi ilmillah. Utawi maknane muttaqin iku ana telung werna and etc. We found here that there is a circle here. Place the row of a dot or a colon. It's signed the end of translation of the verse, but another time the function of the circle is just like a colon that closely connect to related sentences or so on, such as we found here. That the first sentence before the circle here is the translation of this part, bilgoibi, until the word bilgoibi, and the second is the translation until yuqimuna shalah, and the third is the translation for the third part of the ayah. And the next question is, how did Kiai Soledad integrate the mysticism and normative piety in Fayd al-Rahman? I found three way how Kiai Soledad integrate this mysticism and normative piety. The first, he introduced the reader to both normative and mystical interpretation of the Quran. The example we could found in his interpretation of Quran Surah Al-Baqarah verse 222, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْمَحْيِضِ, that this ayah was translated normatively based on its Quranic text, that menstruation is dirty blood flows out from a woman. The Quran prohibits the husband to do sexual activities with his menstruate wife. On the other side, menstruating women are prohibited from praying, reading the Quran, fasting in Ramadan. It's looked like that the menstruated woman become far away from God. She cannot approach God through religious rituals such as praying, reading the Quran, or even fasting in Ramadan until her menstruation is over. But afterward, Kiai Soledad over the mystical meaning of this ayah. in particular part named Makna al-Ishari, or the esoteric meaning of the verse, that he said menstruation is such a condition that prevents humans from something important. That is why menstruation doesn't happen only to women. The men also menstruate differently. Kiai Soleh Darat asserted that each male who cannot control his lustful passion and walk away from God means he menstruates spiritually. The spiritual menstruation is very dangerous due to an obscure period, and spiritual menstruation turn one heart darken and cover it from truth and goodness without a time limit. In comparison, the natural menstruation has a specific cycle. When a woman menstruates biologically, indeed she physically stays away from God, but because she cannot do some worship rituals with her body, but actually her soul stays close to God. This Makna Ishari told us implicitly that the ayah has two meanings. The normative meaning based on the textual narration of the Quran, and the mystical meaning spring up from the emanation of God. Therefore, this translation name Fayd al-Rahman, that means the emanation of God. And the second way is narrating mystical stories where relevant. Uh, there are many examples of this narration. One of them is the mystical stories behind the coronation of King Tolut, or also known as King Saul, when interpreting and translating the Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 246. Alam tara ilal mala'i min bani Israila min ba'di Musa id qalu li nabiyyin lahum ba'ath lana malikan nuqatil fi sabilillah. This ayah talk about the children of Israel after the time of the prophet Moses, when they said to the prophet of their prophet Samuel, send us a king and we will fight in the way of Allah. The mystical story here begin when the prophet Samuel did not choose someone to become the king, but he asked God. Thus, God sent Jibril to the prophet. Jibril bring a can and a bowl with holy butter inside. She said to the prophet, when someone destined to become king is entering this room, this butter should turn into liquid. He is as tall as this can. Soon afterward, after the angel disappeared, and an ordinary young man enters the room, and he is Tolut, or also known as son of Kois. Suddenly, the holy butter turned into liquid. And when the prophet Samuel measured this young man, he was as tall as the can. And the story tells us that some magical things, such as the divine coronation and how the butter turns into liquid only when someone enters the room without touching the butter or doing anything else. And the third way, Kiai Soleh Darat accepts some Javanese mystical tradition and prefer the similar Islamic tradition. In Javanese tradition, the amulet is very familiar. They call jimat. In Indonesian, we call it jimat, an ornament or small piece of sacred thing such as hair, nail, jewels, or even sandal to give calmness and feeling safe. For the modernist Muslim, jimat or amulet is called bid'ah because it doesn't originate from Islam. But Kiai Soleh Darat surprised us with his opinion toward amulet when translating the first 246, 48 from Surah Al-Baqarah. When he translating the word sakina, وَقَالَ لَهُمْ نَبِيُّهُمْ إِنَّ آيَةَ مُلْكِهِ أَن يَأْتِيَهُمُ التَّابُوتُ فِيهِ سَكِينَةٌ. The word sakina. When translating this word, Kiai Soleh Darat explained that there are many interpretations for Sakinah, but he asserted that the strongest interpretation uh, is ingkang asohul akwalan mu'tamadul akwal in dalam maknane sakinah iku tumakninah saking pangerane artine endi-endi panggonan ingkang ana tabut iku padha anteng lan mantep atine kaum Bani Israel kabeh sebab iku tabut jimate para anbiya kabeh. From this quote, the strongest and the most correct interpretation of the word sakinah is that calmness comes from God. The son of Israel feel that no fear as long as they bring the tabut with them or they bring the amulet with them. This interpretation shows us that the amulet is not kind of bid'ah according to Kiai Soleh Darat because even the prophet also have it. Afterward, Kiai Soleh Darat stated that this kind of physical amulet was the well-known amulet in the era of Prophet Adam until the era of Prophet Isa. Allah gave the different amulet to the Prophet Isa and Prophet Muhammad. The spiritual amulet in the spiritual tabut. The spiritual amulet is the word La ilaha illallah, and the spiritual tabut is human heart. This new kind of amulet is more powerful than the old kind of amulet. It even safer because no one can take La ilaha illallah from our heart, and it also cannot be left behind. This narration of amulet, the old and the new, the physical and the spiritual, explicitly show us how Kiai Soleh Darat integrate the normative piety and mysticism. It doesn't matter to anyone who takes a physical material as an amulet, as long as he believe in God, and the real saver and giver of calmness during life is God. The next, we would like to talk about why did Kiai Soleh Darat integrate the normative piety and mysticism in his dakwah? At least there are two factors lies behind the integration. There are the internal integration, the internal factor and the external factor. The internal factor is consists of two. The first is his concept of Islam, and Islam according to Kiai Soleh Darat is Sharia, Tariqah, and Hakikah. Sharia is the region of the physical body, Tariqah is the domain of spiritual heart, while Hakikah is the field of the divine soul. In his book, he said that he given us the brilliant analogy of this three element that Sharia as the ship symbolize the normative law of Islam, Tariqah is the ocean, and sign the way to dive into the normative law by employing the spiritual heart, and the Hakika is the pearl in the ocean, refer to the essence of the law itself, which is the blessing of God. When a Muslim pray with his body, it means that he does the normative piety of Sharia. When he involves his heart in praying, he does tariqah. And when he does the praying by his body and soul to reach Allah laws, he does hakikah. So the second internal factor is his belief in the duality of Quran text. Every Quran text has the dohir meaning or the literal meaning and the batin meaning or the esoteric meaning. These two sides of the Quran also cannot be spared from each other. Kiai Darat wrote that in his preface of the translation that all of the esoteric meaning of the Quran, he take it from Tafsir al-Ghazali. It is essential to say that the Quran exegete cannot jump directly to the esoteric meaning before the literal meaning. and he has to refer to the literal meaning, and afterward he may go to the esoteric meaning. The exegete has to obey this register, that we cannot jump exactly to the esoteric meaning. These are the interfactors that cause why Kiai Soleh Darat integrate the normative piety and mysticism. And the second factor is the external factor. Uh, the first is the tight relationship between the essence of the Javanese tradition with the Islamic tradition. He believes in Sharia, Tariqah, and Haqiqah, and the Javanese tradition believes in two sides of everything. So accommodating the same side and view make the dakwah more effective. The amulet explanation before uh, is the clear example of it. Another example, okay, there are also permit the Javanese to do their daily tradition that time, while someone bow one head and kneel toward parents or the other people, but on condition without any intention of to worship them. Bowing the head and kneeling in front of the human is just kind of physical tradition that does not controvert any normative piety of Islam. On the contrary, the true intention when bowing the head and kneeling before human determines the essence of doing so. There always be a harmonious way to integrate between the tradition and the religion. And the second factor related with the Dutch colonial. According to Nancy Florida's writing, Tradition in Colonial Java, the question of Islam, the Dutch colonial intentionally grows the enmity between the Javanese tradition and Islam. They blow up the differences and hate the similarities between Java and Islam. The Dutch implement the tactic of divide and emperor, dividing the Javanese people to lack their unity. The colonial divided the Javanese Muslim and the Javanese Hindu, the Javanese Muslim and another Javanese Muslim by spring up the Puritanism and traditionalists between the Javanese Muslim. For this purpose, the Dutch make an Arabian descent, Sayyid Usman, and also known by Said Usman as their employee, with that he has the particular task to reveal the strategic fatwa and gainful decision for the Dutch related to Islam. Said Usman was who stood behind the Dutch prohibition of translating Quran into the Javanese language, but also he blamed most of the ulama and pesantren that they are doing bid'ah or doing the wrong Islam by mixing the Islamic normative law and mysticism of Java. The emergence of this kind of political ulama is one of the reasons why Kiai Soleh Darat integrate normative piety, mysticism, and in his dakwah, he proposed to create harmony between Islam and Java, such as could be found in his opinion about Selamatan, Sesajen, and Amulet. We have talked about it. As long as the intention of Selamatan is asking Allah and does not propose to us the devil protection, it doesn't matter to be helped. And what role did the Fayd al-Rahman play in the Javanese Muslim community at the time? At least I found three roles of Fayd al-Rahman. The first is encourage the noble families of Javanese aristocrats to recognize their actual holy book. One of the loosey tradition of time is to teach a Muslim the Quran, but avoid them to understand what did the Quran mean. Even the literate class of Javanese noble family have no opportunities to study the meaning of the Quran. This A circumstance could be traced from the letter of Princess Kartini that Yulia said one of the struggles of women equality movement in Indonesia. But what I want to say here that Kartini is not who asked Kiai Soledad to write the Fayd al-Rahman. Why? Because we can trace from the date of Kartini letter here, in her letter that uh, in November 1899, uh, she said that the Quran is too secret to be translated into another language, even though we have nobody speak in Arabic here. Here, the people learn to read the Quran, but they know nothing about Quran. I think it is crazy thing. How could someone learn something without understanding what he learned? This quote from Princess Kartini letter shows us that how the Japanese people, even the noble family, have no access to the Quran meaning. But on August 17 August 1902, Kartini sent another letter telling that an old man had given her many Japanese books written by an Arabic character or Arabic letters. This book told her about the meaning of the Quran she had never known before. Taufik Hakim research confirmed that the gift was Faidur Rahman, the Japanese Quran we are talking about today. And this translation was not only encouraged Kartini and her family, but also encouraged the Prince Aryo Hadiningrat family, the region of Java. Everyone who read Princess Kartini letter will find the clear shifting paradigm start in the date she received this Quran translation. The shifting influenced her mindset and worldview about Java, Dutch, Indonesia, especially Islam. Um, Second, establishing the social consciousness raises the colonial government among Santri communities. In Majmu'ah Syariah Al-Kafiyah, Kiai Soleh Darat explicitly showed his aversion to Dutch colonial. He prohibited all Muslims to wear a coat because of the Dutch wear that. Furthermore, he ordered any Japanese person who has to enter to Dutch office to start by his left foot, such as the Muslim do when they entering the dirty place such as the bathroom. He also called all of the Muslims to jihad, to rise against the Dutch colonial. This circumstance affect his whole translation and commentaries about jihad and qital in his Fayd al-Rahman. For example, he said that padha matenono sira kabeh ing wong kang nyegah ing sira kabeh saking lumaku marang Allah utawa karep-arep mutusaken ing sira kabeh tarik ilallah rupane saking syayatinil insi wal jin. The meaning is kill who forbid you to go to Allah or get in your way to Allah's path. He who forbid you and get in your way to Allah could be the evil or human. At that time, the Dutch colonial was the most hostile party to Islam. And the third is grew of the humanity. Although Kiai Darat has such a firm fatwa about jihad against Dutch colonial, he still pays excellent attention to see the humanity in war and hostilities. It could be found in his translation and commentaries uh, that if the enemy persecute you, then repay them all with the same persecution they have done to you. And you ought to fear to Allah in your revenge. Do not revenge in harder or worse than what they have done to you. And you really do not start any persecution. It looked like he said that the war is cruel, but a human has not to lose his humanity in war. And that is Julia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ulya Fikriyati. This is wonderful. So, and also thank you for the explanation about the motivation that you mentioned. This is actually purely Keislaman writing the Tarjuma al-Quran, not Kartini. And we have two, okay, we have one response from Pak Ervan Nur Tawab and one more question from, oh, two more questions. So, Pak Irfan, do you want to open your mic or it's enough from your chat?
Hello, yeah, hello, Mbak Yulia. I think it's enough if I can just send my questions from the chat because I'm facing some technical problems here.
Okay, okay, Ulya, should I read the question from the chat, Ulya?
Okay, I haven't opened the chat.
But we still have three more questions from Fadli, Professor Johanna Ping, and also from Duhal. Okay.
But Yulia, actually, this is not a question. This is just my thought that I would like to share. This is about the sometimes scholars tend to make kind of dichotomy between mystic and Islam. Java is more associated with mystic, and Islam as a normative piety is outside Javanese aspect. So yeah, I try to share my aspects about this kind of distinction or dichotomy. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Pak Irfan. So we come to Professor Johanna Ping.
No, I think Fadli was first.
Okay, Fadli. Fadli, are you here? Okay.
Hello. Can you hear my voice?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. I think my question is quite clear in the chat, but okay, I will write it. Have you considered about this Keislaman and Kartini narrative? Have you considered to investigate the validity? Because it is said that Keislaman wrote this commentary based on the advice of Kartini. There's something about that in the narrative, but we found that this commentary was printed before Kartini wrote about her protest to Zalendar. The Tafsi was printed in 1893, and Kartini still wrote about her protest in 1899. So I think it's like not a mismatch connection between Kartini and Saleh-Darat. Have you considered to investigate further about this narrative? I'm afraid that this is one of the Islamization of Kartini, and not about Saleh-Darat, but about our current narrative about Kartini, that we tend to make her Islamic in order to something related to our current situation. It's more about our current day than Saleh-Darat day. Maybe something like that. It's just my curiosity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fadli. But actually, Ulya give the short explain about this. But Ulya, you may explain more about the Fadli question.
Okay. As I said before, that there is the so far gap of that of year between Kartini protest and the publishing the Fayd al-Rah. I agree with Fadli said that it couldn't be Kartini is the reason of writing this translation, but explicitly in her letter, such I read before, that Kartini said that that there is the old man who given her the Arabic book, but in Javanese language. So I refer to another research, that Taufik Lukman research, that he confirmed this is the Fayd al-Rahman. But maybe Kiai Soleh Darat give the printable, the printed tafsir, the printed translation to Kartini, but it cannot be the reason why he wrote this translation. That's it.
Okay, so actually the motivation is still come from Kiai Saleh Darat, right?
No. The motivation come from another, maybe his student that we could find in his preface. That wait a moment, I open the translation. That here he said that the motivation is because of most of our brother, the brother in Islam, asked Kiai Darat to write such a translation of the Quran. This is the motivation. This is the clear and the real motivation that Kiai Soleh Darat wrote in his translation, but we have no information which is who, but it actually cannot be Kartini. That's
okay. Okay, thank you, Ulya. So, Professor Janaping, please.
Yes, it's maybe a bit like bit connected to Erfan's comment. Like this, you started with this assumption that there's a difference between mysticism and normative piety. And I'm wondering whether for Kiai Soleh Darat this was even a difference. I mean, because this was a very, you also said this, that this was a very, like a perception that the Dutch had, for example, that, okay, you have mysticism and it's Javanese and they are not real Muslims because they are not like the normative legalist Muslims that we have defined as proper Muslims. But then, I mean, we know that not only in Indonesia, I mean, across the Muslim world, throughout most parts of Muslim history, mysticism, like Sufism, was just a part of what it meant to be Muslim. And if you had told people that Sufism is not normative Islam, they wouldn't have understood, I think. So they wouldn't even have seen, why should Sufism not be normative Islam, or why should there be a contradiction? Except maybe with some really extreme forms of Sufism where you only have the batin and the zahir is completely irrelevant. But I mean, this was a minority thing. So for most Sufis, there was not really a question of not praying or whatever. So they didn't see a contradiction between applying like Sharia and being Sufi. So yeah, could you say something? I mean, what do we know about Kiai Soleh Darat? Did he even see a difference here? I mean, did he even, like, in his own perception, did he have to actively work to integrate these things, or was this just what any normal Javanese religious scholar or Kiai would have done anyway, because this was the way he was practicing Islam?
Okay. Actually, Kiai Soleh Darat see that there is the essential difference between the Islamic mysticism and the Islamic normative piety. But he see that time that the Dutch is do the effort to divide the Muslim, the Javanese Muslim, between the Puritanism, Puritan, and the traditionalist Muslim, and that's what I see that be the reason why Kiai Soleh Darat tried to connect between the Javanese mysticism and normative piety of Islam. We also can found in his book that he said that that who did the Toriko immediately, or when he believed in God, but he do not pray, that he is not the Muslim, or he do the wrong way in doing Islam. That's
Okay, Ulya, there is another question and response from Pak Jajang Arhmana and Pak Duha Lutfia. Do I need to read, or do you want to respond from Pak Jajang or from Duha? From Pak Duha is, however, I don't think it's right to refer to as the esoteric sophistic interpretation and the use of Israeliyat as mystical interpretation, and even more to say it related to mysticism defined by Gertz and Anderson. And the second question is use ngoko level in communication. Ngoko is the lowest level in Java language. So I don't think it's intent for the movement, but rather for the pedagogy or education. So do you want to respond this from Pak Duha?
okay. I would like to respond first to Duha Lutfilla, that Kiai Soleh Darat use ngoko level in communication, that he said that it's not for dakwah movement, but in Java we actually it's ordinary to say in dakwah in ngoko level in communication, and of course it needs the further research, but I think when he teach to his student, and then his student teach another people, the common people, and this is the kind of dakwah. Even the pedagogy is the kind of dakwah. That's all. And from Pak Jajang, yes, Woodward's book actually give me the light in the first time. Oh, there's some gap between the mysticism and Islam, and when I tried to read the translation, I found this look like not just how to relate or how to integrate between the Islamic mysticism, or we say Islamic Sufism, but it also to relate between the Javanese mysticism, that what I said before about the amulet. The amulet is the very familiar in Japanese life, and this amulet is related to the Islamic Sufism also, and to Islamic normative, because of the normative piety that the Puritans understand. The amulet, of course, it bid'ah, and it cannot be part of the Islam. And this point, what the Kiai Soleh Darat argue with that. Thank you.